Hello everybody, Jordan here. The PH is silent. Bear with me, this is a slightly different video, but a topic I wanted to touch on as a D&D 5e fan and a dungeon master. Counterspell. This has been something that I have been thinking about for a while, and I wanted to get my thoughts out. I dislike Counterspell, but I like the idea of being able to counter spells. I feel with how magic works in Dungeons & Dragons, one should be able to see a spell being cast and counter it. But how Counterspell currently works, it stops the flow of the game. It removes the high tension and the cool factor. So let's talk about how to fix Counterspell. And if you're interested, I'll link some videos in the description for further research. If you look up Counterspell on D&D Beyond, there are a bunch of posts trying to fix this spell, or understand how it works. Why do people feel that it's broken? Well, it kind of takes away fun. As a player, if you counter a spell from an opposing spellcaster, you feel pretty powerful. It's fun to thwart the enemy's plans, but on the reverse, it really sucks. You're casting a deadly spell to turn the tides of battle, and with a simple reaction, the enemy stops your 7th level magic missile. In older versions of Dungeons & Dragons, and indeed other fantasy tabletop role-playing games, wizards had to prepare the number of castings each day. So if you wanted to cast Fireball 3 times, you prepped it 3 times. This was an interesting gamble of how many counterspells do I prep today? Too many, and you don't have other useful spells. Too few, and well, you get overwhelmed by the opponent's magic. A larger problem with Counterspell is the 5e rule, where you can't cast more than 1 spell on a turn. Or, sorry, that's my quick way of saying it. Really, if you cast a spell as a bonus action, you can only cast a cantrip as an action. So as a spellcaster, I can't do something tricky like cast Misty Step as a bonus action to get it countered, which then allows me to cast Fireball like I wanted. Or let's say my Fireball was countered, losing a spell slot. It would be useful if I could recast it on the same turn, and that's not allowed by the rules. But Jordan, you can counterspell a counterspell, so what's the big problem? Listen, what does countering a counterspell do in the grand scheme of things? Rhetorical question, the answer is it uses up spell slots. If the design principle of Counterspell was to burn through spell slots, then there are better ways to do that. Plus, I don't think the designers of D&D 5th edition were thinking, we have given our spellcasters too many spell slots, we should probably add a counterspell mechanic, forcing them to use their resources faster during combat. I think the real problem of Counterspell is you can stop someone's action with a reaction. A reaction is an extra ability that you don't always get to use. It is situational. So when I am able to use this situational out-of-turn ability to cancel someone else's full-turn action, that feels cheap. And that's not fun for both Dungeon Master and player. So how do we fix this? Well, other YouTubers, bloggers, and people in the community have attempted to. Let's take a look at what would fix Counterspell. Number 1, let's just remove Counterspell. It doesn't feel right to me to remove someone's whole spell action with just a reaction. D&D 5e spellcasting isn't balanced around the idea that spells are canceled. I mean, clerics and druids can't even learn Counterspell, but they can be affected by it. Perhaps removing the spell altogether is the correct option. I have run several games without Counterspell, and we didn't have any problems. But countering spells is kind of cool, right? So here are some other alternatives. Number 2, limit Counterspell to arcane casters only. Arcane Counterspell can only counter other arcane spell casters. If a wizard doesn't really understand how divine magic works, they shouldn't really be able to counter it. Magic is magic in D&D, but with how many spell schools there are, I would argue that divine magic is simply different from arcane. Otherwise, why wouldn't a wizard be able to cast Cure Wounds? I don't really like this option, but it does make other spellcasters immune to Counterspell, which alleviates the problem a little bit. Number 3, concentration check the spell. Let's say we changed Counterspell to instead create a concentration check for the target. Instead of just canceling the spell, the target would roll a con saving throw against the spellcaster's spell save DC. If we really wanted to get technical, we could add modifiers depending on the level of the spell to my con check for this, but this way I could take feats or equipment that would help me to resist Counterspell. Having options to counteract this spell is one way to solve a hopeless situation. If there is a chance the spell can still go off, that creates tension and everyone's watching the dice roll to see if the spell will be countered. Number 4, Counterspell stops the spell but doesn't end the target's action. If Counterspell was cast on your character, your spell would fail. It would act as normal, but you wouldn't lose your action. I could still take my turn. Yes, I burned a spell slot and I lost my 7th level spell, but I could still cast a 6th level spell. Maybe that's too strong. Maybe it should just be a cantrip instead. It would need playtesting, but the hypothetical tells me that this would be fine. The player who is counterspelled is a little sad his Finger of Death spell was countered, but he knows the Lich also lost his 7th level spell slot. Now, the wizard can still cast Disintegrate and not feel that his entire turn was wasted. Number 5, my favorite solution to Counterspell comes from another fantasy tabletop RPG. Shocking, we can learn something about RPG design by looking at other RPGs. Now, before I get into this, I realize that 5th edition was based on a more simplistic design. They wanted it to be accessible to new players while offering customization for the players that really like to crunch down on the rules. I personally believe Wizards of the Coast succeeded at this, and I don't necessarily want 5e to have complex rules or minigames for every interaction. It should be left up to the Dungeon Master as to how they really want to play their game. However, saying that, I really like how Counterspell is handled in Dungeon Crawl Classics RPG. If you are new here, you probably haven't heard me rave about DCC RPG, but I love it. If you get a chance, check it out. I'll put some affiliate links below if you want to get a copy of the rules. The spellcasting in Dungeon Crawl Classics was created to reflect how unstable magic can be. In D&D 5e, magic is very reliable, with damage being the only unpredictable state left up to dice roll. Despite that, you still have a strong sense of how much damage a spell will do. If I toss a fireball, it will do damage. I can't tell you the exact amount, but I know the location, the radius, the damage type, and who is getting hit. D&D 5e magic is very specific, and spells are something that are understandable and repeatable. Dungeon Crawl Classics is a game trying to convey the opposite. Magic is dangerous. In the world of DCC, you wouldn't use a light cantrip when you could use a reliable torch. This isn't necessarily a high or low magic setting. Magic might be very prevalent, but it is dangerous and shouldn't be played with. Your light cantrip might blind you, or fire an Iron Man repulsor blast. You don't get the same effect every time. Plus, when adding magic to the situation to counter a spell or dispel magic, you're basically fighting fire with fire. Yes, it can work, but it could also blow up in your face. There is a risk there, and that's what I want for Counterspell in D&D 5e. Something risky, something unexpected to really push the player into thinking, is this the best decision? On the one hand, I could save my friends. On the other hand, I could expand the enemy's spell to double its size. Dungeon Crawl Classics has a mechanic known as spell duels, and I'd like to implement something similar to replace Counterspell. It's a subsystem during combat encounters that is only between two spellcasters, sort of like a minigame during regular combat. There is no spell called Counterspell. Instead, you have to counter a spell from a caster with the same spell. A Lich casting Cone of Cold, you counter it with Cone of Cold. This solves some problems I had earlier where a wizard can stop a cleric from casting spells. If the wizard doesn't know Healing Word, he's not canceling it. But the bard could stop a cleric casting Healing Word. However, in DCC RPG, Dispel Magic can be used to counter any spell, working much like the 5e Counterspell. I'd say optional rule if you wanted to add that. So how does this spell dueling work? Going back to our Lich and Wizard example, on the Lich's turn in initiative, they cast Cone of Cold. The Wizard announces he wants to counter it with either Cone of Cold, Dispel Magic, or a DM-approved spell that would counter Cone of Cold. Once the Wizard announces this, he moves forward instantly in initiative order, but loses his normal turn when it comes around. So you interrupt like a reaction, but at the cost of your main action. The Lich, the Dungeon Master, and the Wizard, the playable character, place a d20 in front of them as a momentum tracker, and each set it to 10. Next, each spellcaster makes their spell checks, which a spell check is a DCC mechanic, but for D&D 5e, we would have each one make an Arcana check, or perhaps just a spell attack. The winner is the roller with the higher number, and they would move their momentum d20 up by 1. In this example, the Lich wins, and his d20 now reads 11, while the Wizard's reads 10. After this, DCC Spell Dueling has created a separate table to roll on that is modified by the momentum difference between casters and the difference between the spell checks. Changing this for D&D 5e, let's say we're just adding the difference between the spell checks plus the momentum. So the Lich rolls a 12 plus 6 equals 18 on his spell check, while the Wizard rolls a 10 plus 6 equals 16. The difference is 2. 18 and 16, with a momentum of 1 in favor of the Lich who won the spell duel, so 3. In order to reflect DCC RPG's spell duel mechanics in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, we'll need to create a defensive and offensive spell interaction list. In this case, the Lich won and would roll on the offensive spell interaction list with a +3. This could be a D20 table or a D100 table. It hasn't been created yet for D&D. That +3 is the amount of magic that the Lich succeeded with. Let's say it's a D20 list. So the Lich rolls 1d20 plus 3, and we get a 6. At a 6, it says the defensive spell slightly works, reducing offensive spell damage by 2d4. However, if he rolled high, say a 19, perhaps his Cone of Cold absorbed the incoming magic, and now instead of 8d8, it actually does 8d10. If the situation was reversed, a low roll on the defensive spell interaction table would mean you'd negated the spell, but not all of it. At a higher level, perhaps you reflect the spell back at the caster. In the nature of D&D 5e, the counterspell table we'd need to create would have better and bigger effects with a higher roll. The duel is now over. The Lich still got his spell off with an action, but the Wizard used his action and spell slot to reduce the damage. Not the best outcome for the Wizard, but if they had won the spell duel, they might have stopped the spell altogether or even reflected it back at the Lich. As the combat continues, if the Wizard counterspells the Lich again, they would repeat this process, which adjusts the momentum tracker even more, in favor of the Lich or the Wizard. It is beneficial to win early and get ahead, but you can still win with a negative momentum to your spell duel D20 table. If ever 2 spell attacks during a duel are equal, such as both roll a 16, then magical energies collide, and you'd roll on yet another table detailing what might happen. In DCC RPG, this is called the Phlogiston Disturbance, and it's spooky for both monster and party. Criticism of this system, this minigame, is that, yes, it is complex. Is it too complex for D&D 5e? Perhaps. I believe with all the frustrations around Counterspell, it's a viable solution, and maybe it could just be presented as a variant rule. My push overall is to keep the action flowing. If you don't think Counterspell just pulls the brake on momentum of the game, watch the first 5 minutes of this Critical Role video where Counterspell does exactly that. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know in the comments below if you like this idea for Counterspell. Is Counterspell fine as it is and I'm just complaining? Do you hate Counterspell, and what are your fixes? I'd love to read your comments. I make weekly lore videos, and perhaps if you like this format, more D&D 5e fixing videos. I have DM's Guild reviews, and I prep my D&D 5e Forgotten Realms game, The Rod of 7 Parts, every Sunday morning at noon Eastern, and we play that game live on twitch.tv/nerdimmersion, 8:30 Eastern, Wednesday nights. Thanks for watching, everyone. I will see you all in the next video.